I used to work as a maid for some old lady for a couple of weeks when I was 20. She had a really big yet old house on a property that could have been beautiful if she had actually taken care of it. She had 2 acres of land surrounded by woods in 3 directions and the road on the other. The house itself was ancient, mostly made of wood, and the interior was really dark. She would often keep the blinds shut in some rooms for reasons I didn't understand. I would sometimes open the blinds to let some sunlight in, only to find that she'd have shut them by the next time I entered the room. She lit some rooms by candle, which made the house seem even more prehistoric from the inside. To top it off, the wood floors were creaky as hell just about everywhere in the house. The woman's name was Mel. She was around 70 years old. The kind of work Mel would have me do would be mostly physical stuff that she couldn't do very well anymore, like sweeping, dusting, cleaning dishes, doing laundry, sorting mail, and other things of that sort. One weekend, Mel asked me to sleep there for a night or 2. The house had like 4 bedrooms, yet she lived alone, so it wasn't an issue. Well, this takes place over the course of a Friday, and technically a Saturday as well. I arrived as per usual on Friday, speaking very few words to Mel. I dropped my backpack full of my clothes and cosmetics onto the bed in the bedroom that I was going to be sleeping in. As I turned to the door, I saw Mel standing by the doorway. She had a creepy way about her, and this entrance was no exception. She didn't say hello, which wasn't as weird as it sounds. She just instructed me to clean the bedroom right away. After that, she just told me to simply straighten up the whole house, and then she went upstairs. I didn't see her for the rest of the day, but I would occasionally hear her walking around upstairs in her bedroom. It was weird, she would seem to walk back and forth. There were no TVs in this house, so I didn't know what she could have been doing. One thing that I found bizarre was how protective she was of her basement. She made it clear it was completely off limits and she didn't want me going down there. Nighttime came and I went to bed early. This was before smartphones were a thing, so I didn't even know what time it was. It was probably 9 or 10 o'clock though. For the first few hours everything was peaceful, however I still had trouble falling asleep given that it was the most uncomfortable bed I'd ever been in. It felt like hours later that I started hearing footsteps outside my room on the creaky floors. It sounded like Mel was passing my room really slowly. Maybe she was just going to the bathroom. A few minutes later, I heard her footsteps again, but then she stopped outside my door this time. I sat up and listened. I could hear the creaking from behind the door of Mel standing there, and it was starting to creep me out. She finally walked away. I heard her go down the stairs, and then I heard a door open and close from downstairs. I had a feeling it was the basement door. It was a while later that I heard the door open and close again, and then heavy, slow footsteps coming up the creaky stairs. The footsteps once again came to my door, then stopped. I sat up once again to listen, and I could hear creaks of pressure on the floor outside the door, and then I heard the doorknob start to turn. I laid back down and pulled the sheets over me and pretended to be asleep. I heard Mel take a few steps into the room, pause, and then leave. She went back to her room and shut the door. I was a bit disturbed. This was very bizarre behavior. I waited about half an hour before deciding I had to see what was in that basement. I got out of the rickety bed, tiptoed to the door, and then tiptoed down the stairs the best I could. I opened the heavy basement door, flipped on the lights, and crept down the stairs. I made it to the bottom step, and held in the urge to scream. There were 2 old wooden chairs dead center in the basement, and there were 2 of what I could only describe as decaying corpses with wigs on them sitting in them. The sight of a bug crawling on one of them made me want to puke even more. I brought myself to walk deeper into the basement, closer to the corpses. I had to make sure they were real. Both of the corpses had men's wigs on them. The bigger of the 2 also had a beret on. I don't know much about corpses or their rate of decaying, but I'd say these corpses were both almost a year old. I felt like my heart stopped momentarily when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs on the first floor. I couldn't make it to the light switch. I had no time. I hid behind one of the couches in the basement as I heard slow, heavy footsteps coming down one creaky stair at a time. I had my hands covering my mouth as I heard Mel reach the last stair. I heard her whisper my name. For half a second, I looked around the couch and saw Mel halfway across the basement already with a big kitchen knife in her hand. I knew she would be too slow to catch me, so I ran for it to the stairs. She screamed my name and followed as fast as she could. When I made it to the first floor of the house, I ran upstairs to the bedroom I was sleeping in to grab my backpack. By the time I ran back downstairs, Mel was at the top basement step. I ran out the front door and to my car. I turned it on, caught my breath, looked to the front door of the big old house, and saw Mel standing there. I drove off the huge property and down the road, making it back home within 10 minutes. Fortunately, I never gave Mel any of my information, such as my address or my phone number, so she was never able to contact me again. If I had to guess, I'd say one of those corpses belonged to her dead husband that she'd mentioned twice to me. As for the other, smaller corpse, I have no idea. But regardless, it was a disturbing scene to witness, and something was way off about that woman.
During a rainy night in central Islip on Long Island, a teenager named Ian was home alone, so he invited his friend Carl over. His friend texted that he would be over in 2 minutes. Ian prepared the video games he planned on playing with Carl and heard the gate to the backyard close. Confused as to why Carl went out back, Ian went out to the backyard. His shed door was open with the light on. As he called out Carl's name walking to the shed, the light inside the shed turned off. Simultaneously, Ian received a text from Carl saying, "I'm here." Ian responded, "Are you in the shed?" He responded back, "I'm at the front door." As Ian looked up, the door to the shed pulled shut with force. Ian ran back into his house and let Carl in. When the police responded to Ian's call, they checked the shed, found the door was back open, and that nobody was inside. 22-year-old Garber still lived with his parents. He was the youngest of 3, so his 2 siblings had already moved out and his parents were out 3 to 4 nights a week. This one particular stormy night, he was home alone in his room when he could swear he heard something hit his window. It wasn't insanely weird, as the weather was pretty bad and something may have just blown into his window. However, a second thud at the window sent his heart racing. He lifted his blind and could see somebody standing out there. Even through the damp windows and the pouring rain, he knew he did not recognize that person. He shut the blinds to send the message to go away. However, he wasn't even able to move away from the windowsill before something else was thrown at the window. Garber opened the blind, and this time even the window, and shouted, "What do you want?" The man down below called back, "Come outside, I want to show you something." Garber went downstairs to call the police. They asked him if he was sure that he didn't know the person and if they had caused any damage. The 911 operator asked Garber to call back if the person continued to harass him or showed signs of wanting to break in. Garber hung up the phone. He wanted to see a better view from down in the kitchen, so he opened the kitchen blinds. Garber called the police right back and informed them that the man was standing at his kitchen window and to send somebody right away. The next time he looked back at the kitchen window, the man was gone. That was the last time Garber ever saw that man.
Me, my friend Sarah, and my best friend Canada needed to find something to do and somewhere to smoke. There are woods in a very short walking distance from Sarah's house, and us all being very adventurous 15-year-olds thought that that would be perfect. We could smoke, then adventure the woods. Thinking back, I wish we would have smoked behind Sarah's house and just watched scary stories or some shit, but we didn't. When we made it to the opening that led into the woods that we went in, we adventured, we smoked, and overall, we had fun. And I wish the story ended there. You could clearly see anyone entering or exiting the woods from the streets. Sarah lives in a very nice neighborhood, except one house beside the woods that we were in. This house was old, and me and my friends often joked about how it looked like something out of The Hills Have Eyes. It was a rusty, blue tin house with pigs in the backyard. We were all on the path exiting the woods when we saw a bluish-gray Chevy pickup. The truck started up, and me and my friends jokingly decided to run away from it, and we were shocked to see the truck started following us. Every time we stopped, so did it. We took off running. There was a small hill that we hid behind so the truck couldn't see us. The truck passed, and after a while, we got up, laughed it off, and started walking out of the woods thinking it was a joke. After about 5 minutes of walking, we started to approach the exit, but we were all struck with fear when we saw headlights blocking the exit. We looked at each other, wondering what to do. Upon looking into the truck, I saw that it was a larger-sized man in a hat and red shirt, but that was all I could see from that distance. In panic, Canada pulled out a small pocket knife. However, I didn't have much trust in her abilities to use it, so I took the knife as we all ran into the woods until we thought we were safe. We waited for a second, gathering our thoughts and our breath, and finally left the woods and went to Sarah's house. This happened at the end of our freshman year of high school. We are all in the middle of our sophomore year now, and we've since stayed away from those woods for months. On September 10th, however, we went into the woods one last time. It was Sarah's birthday, and again, we needed to find somewhere to smoke. There were 6 girls and 2 boys, so we thought it would be fine to go back into the woods, figuring safety in numbers. After entering the woods and walking for a while, we found a path. Me, Sarah, and Canada had seen the path before, but we never adventured it. To get to the path, you had to go down a small, steep hill. We all made it down the hill, and soon after came up to a fork in the path leading 2 ways. We chose to go left. It was a short trail which led to a small building that looked like it was abandoned before having been fully built. There was a wooden ladder, a small fire pit, but perhaps the oddest thing we found were the saws hanging by strings from tree to tree. Given that we were all stoned, perhaps we didn't take the findings as seriously as we normally would have. We decided to adventure down the right side of the fork in the path. Not far down the path, we found something truly horrific. There was a hangman-like structure, there was a noose on the ground, an old pair of shoes nearby, and a shovel. I'd never felt so uneasy in my life. We took pictures of everything and we quickly left the woods safely, and I've made a personal promise to never go back into those woods. We believe the man who chased us in the pickup truck had something to do with what we found in the woods, and we were only more grateful after this that he didn't catch us. I'm 27 years old. I live alone in a rural town in Virginia, about 2 blocks away from my parents. My parents are both in their 60s, and my mom has become a very worrisome woman in her old age. Sometimes she walks over uninvited and lets herself in, since I had regrettably given her a key, which can get a bit annoying. Like if I would be out really late on weekends at a bar or with women, I would sometimes come home to my mom sitting in the living room waiting, worried sick. I know you may just think, oh my god, that's crazy, why not just put your foot down and tell her to stop? Well, because you don't know my mom. It's very hard to describe her, but she's the kind of worrisome, innocent little lady that you just can't bring yourself to go against. And I hate to mention, she also has mild dementia. Anyway, this was Saturday night. I think it was around 2 in the morning. I was at a nearby club with a group of college friends, really the only place to hang out in this boring town, and I was getting ready to head home. I said goodbye to all my friends and walked the 3 blocks it took to get back to my house. I walked up my front stoop in my drunken haze and dug my hand in my pocket for my keys. When I grabbed the doorknob, I realized it was unlocked. My mom was here again. I quietly opened and shut the front door, locking it behind me. I put my keys on the kitchen counter and found a note written in my mom's handwriting saying, "You forgot this at our house, next to the box of half-eaten cake my parents didn't want." I didn't see my mom anywhere, so I assumed she must have gone upstairs to sleep in the guest bed until I got back, which is something she would commonly do as well. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, confirming it, and that's when I sighed once again. 27 years old, almost 3 in the morning, and she still has to wait up and treat me like a child. I ran upstairs to check the guest bed, empty, along with all the bathrooms. I was afraid Mom was having one of her episodes due to her condition, so I ran to the phone to call my dad. After 4 rings, my dad picked up in a groggy voice, asking what the hell is the matter. After I told him that I heard Mom wandering around upstairs in my house, there was a short pause, and then he said, "That's not possible, she's sleeping right next to me." My mouth fell open as I turned my head to face the dark upstairs, and just barely by the light provided by the kitchen, I could see a head peering around from the corner at the top of the stairs, looking down at me. I screamed into the phone as I ran out the front door and down the street to my parents' house, explaining to my father on the way. About halfway there, my dad told me, "Alright, I'm gonna call the cops," and hung up. I made it to my parents' house, where my mom was already waiting at the door, worried sick. My mom explained that she did come over to clean my kitchen a little bit and to bring over the cake they didn't want. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my parents' house, where they escorted me and my dad down the street to my house. 1 officer stayed outside with us, while 2 others went inside to investigate. It felt like 15 minutes before they came back outside and said it was clear. They checked the crawl space, the attic, everything. There was really nothing for me to report, other than the door was left unlocked and I saw the outline of a head upstairs before I ran for it. Still, I didn't feel safe sleeping in there that night, so I went back to my parents' house. Me and my dad are certain that my mom simply forgot to lock the door when she left, as her memory has been getting worse over the past few months. My dad has been stopping her from coming over alone from now on, which makes me both sad but also relieved. Some nights, I still get paranoid that whoever was in my house that night never left, and is still hiding in here somewhere.
45-year-old Chris was supposed to be working late for the night, so his family went out to eat dinner without him. However, he was unexpectedly able to come home early. As a result, he had the house to himself for a few hours. He went down to his man cave in the basement to watch TV. That was when he heard the backyard basement window flap open, and someone stuck their head inside, peering around the room. He hid behind the couch until the person shut the window. Chris ran upstairs with a baseball bat and shut off all the lights. He waited in the kitchen, which was by the back door. Somebody suddenly reached their arm through the pet door in an attempt to unlock the door. Chris swung the baseball bat as hard as he could at the person's arm, causing them to scream and flee. That same night, sirens roared down the street and stopped at a neighborhood house. It turned out one of Chris's neighbors 3 doors down had been murdered, and when his wife came home, she found the house was ransacked with missing valuables everywhere, and then she found her husband dead on the kitchen floor with a stab wound in the back of his head.
When me and my troublemaking friends were 13 years old, one of the many rowdy and mischievous things we would do would be Saturday night ding-dong ditch sessions. 10 years ago, we all lived on the same block in a typical suburban neighborhood. At the time, there were a lot less houses and more woods though. I'm going to make up names for my friends for the case of this story. There was Mark, James, and Matt. Either Mark or James were usually the ones to go up to the houses and ring the bells. Matt and I, on the other hand, would usually find hiding spots right away. We hit about 5 or 6 houses. I remember all of the men who answered the doors gave pretty much the same reactions. They'd step out onto the stoop, 1 or 2 would yell something, and then they'd walk back inside. For a couple of houses, we'd ring the bell again for a better reaction. One guy yelled he was calling the cops the second time, so when he shut his door, we all booked it down the street and went to the next block over. As I mentioned, 10 years ago in this neighborhood, there were patches of wood sitting where houses sit today. On the next block over, there were a few patches of wood surrounding some of the houses, and the houses on this block seemed to be more unkempt. The first house on the block was across the street from a patch of woods, which made for a perfect hiding spot. The house was kind of run down looking, tall grass, a ratty old car with a cover on it in the driveway, and overall just a small house. Mark went up to ring the bell. He barely had time to make it across the street before the door opened. It was another man to answer the door. This guy really big, about 6 foot and stocky build. Unlike the others, he was furious immediately. He walked around his whole front yard checking the bushes, yelling threats. We all laughed as we always did. Eventually, he finally went back inside. Mark waited a few minutes, checked the windows, and then ran back up the stoop to ring the bell again. I didn't envy him with this house. I would not be bold enough to ring that man's bell again. Mark knew he probably didn't have as much time, so he ran to the side of the house and out of sight. The door opened much quicker this time, and this time the man came out with a rifle in his hand. We all looked at each other, simultaneously going, "Oh shit," under our breath. The man checked all the places he checked before, and then a few extra places this time, like behind his car, behind a couple trees, and then he walked to the center of his lawn and just stood there, as if he were thinking. He looked around, and then his head stopped as he was facing us in the woods. Me, Matt, and James looked at each other. We ducked lower in hopes that he didn't see us. After 10 seconds of staring in our direction, the man went back into his home. And then, we saw him appear at his front window, standing still like a statue, looking in our direction in the woods once again. We saw Mark creeping back over to the man's front door, but there was nothing we could do. We were too afraid to move or yell anything. Mark rang the bell once again and ran for it. The man didn't move though, at least not for another minute. Then he turned and walked away from the window. We didn't see Mark again, but we were still too nervous to move or say anything. The next thing I remember, we heard Mark's voice from across the street yelling, "Run." We didn't understand until we heard someone running up from behind us, realizing upon turning our heads that it was the man from across the street with his rifle in hand, pointed at us. We ran like little prey from a predator to Mark, who was waiting for us across the street. We ran for blocks until we were sure we lost him. Mark explained that he yelled when he saw the man sneaking across the street into the patch of woods with his gun. We didn't report him or any of what happened. We just told a few friends and that was it. Luckily, the house was many blocks from us, so we never really had to pass it again.
A young girl named Anne was home alone one snowy Friday night. Her parents were out to dinner, and her sister was out with friends. She was taking a nap on her bed. She awoke to the thump. She was sure it came from her closet door, so she got up and bravely opened it. There didn't seem to be anyone inside, so she closed the closet and spun around. There she saw the head under the bed, the head of a man looking at her with an expressionless stare. She fell to the floor screaming. That's when the closet doors behind her opened and someone grabbed her and pulled her in. The man from under the bed emerged and approached her as she was being held down. The two of them carried her downstairs where they put tape over her mouth and tied her arms together. One checked to make sure the coast was clear before carrying her outside, where they planned to put her in their car's trunk. However, about halfway to their car, a large group of teenagers came riding down on their bikes and witnessed it all. Some of them were screaming for help, while some of them got off their bikes and started to slowly approach the two men. They knew they wouldn't get away with it now, so they dropped Anne, jumped into their car, and sped away. She was completely awake and conscious throughout all of this. It's unknown why they didn't just tie her up while she was sleeping. The most realistic possibility is that they simply wanted to scare the girl. This may seem like a crazy, rare occurrence, and you may even call it fake. However, things like this happen all the time, and are shown commonly on the news. Perhaps they're just the stories we forget about. It happened on my friend's 21st birthday. We were throwing him a big party filled with alcohol. There were a lot of people I didn't know there. It was just chaotic in the house. There were probably 100 people. But even in all the chaos, I noticed one shady character that stood out. There was an older man sitting in the corner of the room, just kind of watching everybody drinking and dancing. I didn't think much about it at first, assuming it was someone's dad or uncle or something. But as the night died down, and more than half of the guests had already left, the man was still there, by himself in the corner. At that point, I asked one of my friends who that guy was, and he said he had no idea. We decided to wait until most of the guests had left, figuring maybe he would too. And when the last of the guests were gone, we went back into the living room, and surely enough, he was gone. I felt relieved immediately, even though it wasn't even my house. That man just seemed so out of place, and it was downright creepy. Me and a couple of other friends slept over that night. I slept on the couch in the den. Falling asleep was easy with all the alcohol running through my veins, but staying asleep was a problem. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling insanely thirsty and having to go to the bathroom. I first went to the bathroom since it was closer, and then went up to the kitchen and got a glass of water. When I went back down to the den and laid back down on the couch, I noticed that the sliding door to the coat closet across from the couch had been slightly slit open. It was too dark to see anything else though, like anything inside of it. I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered the creepy man sitting in the corner. The idea of that man hiding in the closet immediately popped into mind. I continued to lay still, under the assumption that he was watching me through the open door of the closet. I began to plan my escape. I could jump over the other couch and land right next to the stairway upstairs to the living room, but I just had to gather up the courage to do it. Then I saw the closet door slide open a little more, and that's when I got the courage to run for it. I jumped over the couch and ran up the stairs. I could hear the closet door fully slide open and somebody running after me. I screamed at my friends who were on the couches to wake up. All three of my friends that were in the living room woke up and looked at me as if I were crazy. I knew that we now outnumbered him 4-1, so I looked at the stairs and waited, but he never came up. My friends demanded an explanation, so I told them that the creepy man from earlier was hiding in the coat closet, and he almost chased me up the stairs. Just then, we heard the back door from down in the den open up, and we all looked at each other. We called the cops, but the man was never found. He simply left through the back door. This happened about 7 years ago, ironically on Halloween night. It was pretty late, close to midnight, so all the kids in the neighborhood had already gone home. Even our neighbors across the way had stopped playing their corny Halloween tape. You know, the ones with the creaking door sounds and witch cackling. It was just me and my cousin Q, sitting in the living room. Now, my other cousin, who was about 4 years old, had left her doll laying on the floor, face down. It was one of those baby alive dolls or something like that. The ones with the moving eyelids. Q had issues with that doll the moment it was bought. She hated it and said it was creepy. In fact, she often threw it down the basement stairs. I had no problems with it, and so it stayed on the floor so my little cousin could pick it up in the morning. It was very quiet for about half an hour, until I heard a loud, rasping, shuffling noise that seemed to be coming from outside. It sounded like an older man right outside our window. I turned to Q, who looked back at me. "Did you hear that?" "It's probably the neighbor's tape again," she said. She went back to typing on her computer. It was silent for another minute before we heard the rasping noise again, louder this time. It sounded like the man was trying to say something. I got up from the couch and peeked out the window. Absolutely no one out there, not even in the street. Our neighbor's house was dark. It was as still as any night in our quiet neighborhood. "There's no one out there," I said, looking back to Q. She didn't say anything. I was kind of getting freaked out. Another minute passed, and this time there was whispering, but loud whispering. I remember it sounded like a kid and a woman. Q finally looked up from her computer. "It's that doll," she said. Of course she thought it was. She was very superstitious. I gave her a skeptic look. Let me say this. I don't believe in the paranormal. I leant down and picked up the doll. It was fine. Her eyes were closed. I forgot to say that it had a voice box thing in it, but it didn't have any batteries. I put it back down. "No, it's not. Just leave it alone," I told her. It was silent again. I went back to my seat on the couch. The rasping started again, and I heard the man say something garbled, followed by wheezing. I jumped up from the couch. I was going to see if it was coming from the backyard. Just as I started walking, I noticed that the doll had moved a little. I picked it up again and turned it over. Its eyes were open, and it was heavier than before. I dropped it, and Q threw it down the basement again. I still have no idea what to think. Q denies it ever happened, and my little cousin never asked about her doll after that. I saw the doll only one time after that, on the top basement step laying on its side. This time, I pushed it down the steps. Working the night shift always sucked. I work in an office building and would constantly do the night shifts since it was the only time it would work out for me. I was just about always the only person on the floor I worked on, possibly in the whole building. There would always be a kind of eerie feeling to being in such a big building with most of the lights out and absolutely no one around. But on the upside, it was peaceful and less stressful, and I was able to get a lot of work done. There was this one night though. It was a Friday night, around 2 in the morning. I was typing away on my keyboard when I heard a noise from outside my cubicle. It sounded like just a random crack from the walls or something. It's unusual in this building, but I didn't get too concerned about it. I resumed typing away and was once again interrupted by a sound. This time, the sound of a computer starting up. It caught me off guard. I was sure nobody else was working the night shift. I stood up on my chair to get a view over the cubicle walls. The glare of a computer screen in the dark was visible in a cubicle on the opposite side of the room. Then I did something stupid, something I regret. I asked if there was anybody there in a yell, hoping to get an answer from a fellow employee. But instead, I saw the glaring light of the computer monitor across the room turn off, and there was once again nothing but darkness on that side of the room. I started getting nervous. I turned off the lamp and computer screen so that I wouldn't give away my position to whoever that was. I crouched down and tiptoed out across to a nearby cubicle. There was just utter silence. I sat waiting for something to happen for God knows how long, but I eventually decided the coast was clear. I tiptoed down past all the cubicles until I reached the opening near the exit door to the stairs and elevators, and that's when I realized that my fearful suspicion was true. There was a man crouched down behind a plant in the corner of the room, dressed in all black. I felt my heart sink as I noticed him, but it didn't seem like he knew that I noticed him. I turned back to the stairway door. There was no way I was going to wait for the elevator and take a chance. I casually opened the door and closed it behind me, proceeding to walk down the stairs. After making it down about 2 flights of stairs, I heard the door above me push open aggressively, followed by manic echoing footsteps coming fast down the stairs. I raced down the stairs, running as fast as I could, all while the footsteps above me were getting louder. I finally made it to the first floor, raced through the lobby, and out the front door. Whoever was in there didn't follow me. I immediately called the cops, along with one of my bosses. My boss said no one was scheduled to work except for me. The cops scanned the place from top to bottom. There was no one in there. I couldn't help them out with any description other than he was wearing all black. I did continue to do the night shift for about a week after that, with my boss allowing me to lock all possible entrances to the floor, including the elevators. But I still wasn't comfortable with it, so ever since, I've been doing the day shifts. My parents are divorced and I was living with my dad. I'm an only child, so the only time I was around kids my own age was when I was out making friends with kids on the block. There was this one kid that lived on the corner of my block. His name was Tom. I met him while riding my bike. He strangely invited me over to shoot some hoops with him, so I did. He was a lot older than me. I was 12 and he was 16. I found out after hanging out with him a lot that he was an only child as well, and that he also lived with his dad. At first, I found him very relatable. I gave him my phone number and he would call to hang out. Sometimes he would come over and play video games. But then he started getting weird. He would call non-stop. If I didn't answer, he would begin to leave annoyed messages. He would call 5 or 6 times before coming over and ringing the bell. If my dad wasn't home, I usually didn't answer it, but when he was home, he would force me to hang out with Tom, even though I told him he was creepy. I biked with Tom back down to his house while pretending to listen to him babble on about stupid shit. This kid would never shut up. I needed to find a way to get him to stop looking for me. Then, for the first time, he invited me into his house. I really didn't want to go in, but it didn't seem I had a choice. The second I walked into the door, the foul, disgusting odor of his house filled my lungs. Clothes were tossed all over the floor, broken glass in one corner of the room, and what looked like coffee stains on the wall. It was the most disgusting place I'd ever seen. And then, a huge, shady-looking man walked out from another room. He looked at me with a very intimidating look. I felt myself backing up away from him, until Tom introduced him as his father. The man just gave me a big grunt and stomped off into another room. It was official, this kid was a fucking creep. I needed to get away from him for good. I decided I didn't even want to be in that house anymore and just made up some excuse to go. I think that I said that I forgot I had a doctor's appointment, and at that moment, his smile slowly faded as an unhappy, if not extremely angry expression crossed his face. He didn't even give me any response. He just looked at me with this unnerving stare. I left in a hurry and ran back down the block to my house. The door was locked, surprisingly. I unlocked it with the key my dad made me carry and found that he wasn't home. I really wanted him to be home. And then I found a little sticky note on the fridge saying he was called into work for a possible storm emergency. So that night before going to sleep, I checked my email for a response from somebody on eBay. But instead, I had about 5 new emails all titled in capital letters, and they were all sent from an email named tomtom20@aol.com. It was him. I never gave him my email and still have no idea how he got it. One of the emails was titled, "You made a mistake." Another was titled, "I know where you live," and the rest were filled with profanity and threats. I was only 12 and was extremely intimidated by this, so I was ready to call my dad, but as soon as I was heading to the kitchen phone, I heard the sound of rustling bushes outside. I opened the blinds of the window that was facing the bushes, and was greeted by the face of a huge man who I instantly recognized as Tom's dad. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was already gone. When my dad came home early because of this situation, we went on to get a restraining order as soon as possible. Tom and his dad moved out about a month after that. The most horrifying experience that ever happened to me didn't even directly happen to me. I have a friend that I'll call Ty. We would hang out or at least text every day, but there was this one day that he didn't respond to any of my texts or calls. I went over to his house, which was a block away, to see if he was alright. I knocked and rang, but he didn't answer, which was weird because his car was there. I got the feeling he wanted to be left alone, but late that night, I got a FaceTime request from an unknown number. I cautiously answered it with the camera aimed away from my face. A face popped up on the screen, and it was Ty. I felt so relieved and showed my face. When I got a little better look at his face, I noticed he looked different, like a lot more tired and, I don't know, paranoid, I guess. And he was also in an unfamiliar room. I asked him where he was and why he wasn't answering, to which he responded that he was fine and he was at home. I asked him whose phone he was using, and he just took a long pause before answering. He just blankly stared at the camera until finally answering that he was using his uncle's phone. That was really weird, but before I could question him further, he all of a sudden demands that I lend him $10,000 and that he'll pay me back. I can't help but laugh at this until I see that he's serious. More than just serious. His facial expression filled with what looked like worry. I asked him why the hell he needed so much money, and there was once again a huge pause, with him just staring into the camera. He finally says he has to go, and with that, the call ended. It was probably one of the weirdest and most unnerving experiences of my life. I had never seen him act so weird. Something was clearly wrong with him. But it was late, and I figured I would just go over to his house tomorrow and talk with him. The next day, first thing in the morning, I went straight over to his house and rang the doorbell about 10 times. He didn't answer. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause. If he wanted to act sketchy, that was his problem. But late that night, around the same time, I received another FaceTime call from another unknown number. I answered it, and it was again Ty. But this time, he looked like shit. His hair was a mess. He had a cut on his forehead. He had bags under his eyes. I didn't understand what the hell was wrong with him. He wouldn't tell me anything. He just kept demanding $10,000 to be paid to some random address, to which I kept telling him no. And then he said something that still haunts me. He said in a shaky, nervous voice, "Come on, don't point a gun at my back." It hit me like a bullet as he said this, accompanied with an ever so slightly twitch of his left eye, to which I interpreted as a wink. But then, the call ended abruptly, and I can only imagine what was going to happen to him. By some miracle, I remembered the address and sent the cops there right away. It was an old abandoned house in a basically deserted block miles away from my house. They found Ty in the basement, beaten senseless and barely alive, but they got to him just in time. The sicko that did this to him was already long gone. Ty doesn't like to talk about it, but the most he told me was that he was walking home before everything went black, and he woke up in a dark basement. This is a very weird story that took place a few months ago. I still live in the same house this happened in. I have an electrical outlet under my bed that I use to charge my phone with. I leave my phone up on the ledge above my bed every night, usually using it as an alarm. However, something strange started happening on a Monday night in February. I woke up to my alarm clock blasting. Only it was still dark out. I looked at my actual alarm clock sitting on my desk. It was 4 in the morning. I wasn't sure if I'd accidentally set a new alarm. The alarm was titled Down. I unset it and went back to sleep, not overthinking it. The next night, I woke up again to the sound of my phone's alarm clock blasting. I saw that the time was 3 in the morning, and the alarm clock title was set to Beneath. No way had I set that alarm. I would remember something like that. I figured my brother was playing a joke on me somehow. The next morning, I told my dad to tell him to stop messing with my alarm clock, that it's interrupting my actual sleep on school nights. But he swore on his life that he had never touched it, and I kinda believed him. That night, I put a password on my phone and wrote it on a sticky note just for safekeeping. I hid the sticky note on the wall behind my bed and made sure no extra alarms were set. The only one was set for 8 a.m. I fell asleep, but once again, I woke up to the blasting alarm clock in total darkness. 2 a.m. The alarm was titled The. I was a little freaked out now. Something was really wrong with my phone. I was sure someone was hacking into it. The next day I left it off for the whole day in hopes that whoever was messing with it would forget about it. And that night I used my actual alarm clock on my desk as an alarm instead. I set it to 8 a.m. and went to sleep. But when I woke up, there was once again no sunlight. My alarm clock was off, so I couldn't see the time. It was my phone. It had been moved to the ledge. But the alarm clock sound wasn't the usual marimba. It was some kind of distorted screaming sound. I turned off the alarm, which was titled Bed. It was 1 a.m. I was laying there clueless, not knowing what to think. My phone was at 10%, so I reached down under my bed to try and find the charger that's normally plugged into the wall. It was missing. And then, at the worst possible time, I realized exactly what it all meant. The 4 alarm titles formed a sentence. Down, beneath, the bed. I tried to pull my arm away, but it was too late. I felt a hand grab my arm and squeeze tight. I screamed as loud as I could, loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. I heard my parents' bedroom door open and footsteps running over to my room. My door opened and my dad barged in with a baseball bat. He saw that I was being pulled down to the edge of my bed. My dad reached under my bed and grabbed a hold of the man hiding under. He knocked him out with the bat and called the cops. The man clearly didn't plan that out, as he basically trapped himself under my bed. Police told us that he was a registered sex offender who had been arrested 10 times. He's extremely messed up in the head, and clearly gains pleasure from messing with and scaring his victims. It scares me the most that he was in our house, and under my bed, for 4 days. So me and a couple of my buddies went camping last summer alongside the Willamette River. We actually had a decent hike into the deep end of woods. We did some night fishing, listening to music, and basically drank to the point where everything was funny later in the night. I would guess we finally called it a night somewhere past 2 a.m. I shared a tent with one of my buds, while the other two shared another tent. We heard them laughing about something. At first we laughed at the sound of their laughing, but it soon got annoying and we yelled for them to shut up. One of them responded, "It isn't us." I sat up, startled at the response. I came to realize that it was the sound of only one person laughing, and it didn't sound like either one of my friends. Even in my drunk state, I realized how odd it was for somebody to be out this far in the woods so late at night. The laughing gradually got closer and louder to our campout. My friend shot up and looked at me with a worried look on his face. I heard my other friends scream over to us that they were getting freaked out. As the laughing got even closer, I could make it out very clearly to be the laugh of a male, probably in his 30s or 40s. He sounded like he was as drunk as us, messing around with friends, but we only heard his laugh, nobody else. There was something indescribably creepy about his laugh too, as if it was missing something to it. You had to be there to understand what I mean. The laughing was now just at the edge of our campsite. But we couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Now that may not seem like a big deal. It was impossible to move through that without making noise. And finally, all of a sudden, the laughing stopped completely. We had no idea where whoever that was standing, as he hadn't made a single stepping sound. We sat there in silence looking at each other. My friend was clearly freaking out, but he was keeping it together the best he could. Finally, something broke the silence. The sound of something rubbing against the cottony fabric of the tent. We saw the outline of a hand through the moonlight, pressing on the tent. We both screamed at the top of our lungs before getting out of the tent. We ran as fast as we could through the woods, our other friends following us. After about 5 minutes of running, we somehow found our car. I actually puked from running so much before taking the wheel. I don't condone drinking and driving, but I still believe we were just in this situation. By far the most horrific experience of my life. No idea who or what the hell that was, or what they wanted. My boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality time camping. We had always gone with several other people, but this was the first time it was just us two. When we got out of our car to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot, two sketchy-looking dudes came out of the trailhead, eyed us, and went back onto their old-school Volkswagen camper van. I had a weird feeling, but shrugged it off and proceeded back to our camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times, and I knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I knew of a handful of different camping spots, and proceeded to check them all out for the one that would be ideal for us. I noticed what looked like someone camping further up the hill, so I picked a spot a little further down where we'd most likely be out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I heard him yelling with someone else back over on the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we got everything set up, so I figured I'd start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere and asks us if we'd like any help, and offered to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laughed because we were in the woods, thus surrounded by wood, which I could pick up off the ground for free. He then said that I wouldn't find much because they'd already cleared it out over the past few weeks. Few weeks? I asked him how long he'd been camping up there, and he said almost a month. I already had the creeps about him, and he claimed he was up there by himself. I asked him why I heard him yelling with someone then, and that he had referred to more people when he was talking about the wood. He stammered and was like, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there up on the other side of the river. Then he proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived. He was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, and had been living in the woods back behind where I currently work. I knew exactly where he was talking about, because I saw some homeless people, immigrants, and drug addicts coming in and out of those woods every day. So basically he was a homeless man who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided he would just live there instead. He had been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for money. But he said we were the first people he'd seen in a few weeks. His stories were all over the place, and I knew he was lying about a lot of what he told us. He wasn't alone, even if he claimed to be. He even took us to his camp where there were tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up top where he could see everything, and everyone. Then showed up our campsite. He had a straight shot view. By now it was dark and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to politely get him on his way back up the hill so I could have a minute to process all of this. When he left, I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that lying, sketchy, homeless creep right up the hill. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even a dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. My boyfriend somehow convinced me to stay a little longer, so we planned to stay the night. But all throughout the night, we heard twigs and branches snapping around our tarp, as if somebody was watching us. It was that man. I knew it was. He was standing out there, watching us. I said let's quietly get our shit together and get the hell out of there, which we did, only we left our new tarp set up because they would make too much noise and he'd know we were leaving. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get the hell out of there, he yells, "Leaving so soon?" We proceeded to get away from there as quickly as possible. The most disturbing thing, as we were getting away from there, the man yelled for us to come back. That only made us go even faster. In my mind, we were either getting robbed, raped, killed, or something, because he was not alone. His stories didn't add up, and his background of where he came from made me believe he was running from something and was trying to hide by living off the grid. I called the rangers the next morning and told them about him. Luckily, all he got from us was a set of new tarps. I spent a solid weekend playing on the computer a few years ago, drinking a lot of ephedra and coffee and generally not sleeping much. Every so often I'd feel an itch on my arms, like a loose hair falling on them. I'd brush it off and go back to staring at the computer. As this itching was happening more frequently, I started wondering if I was just imagining things, or delusional from the tea and insomnia. but then I noticed what appeared to be tiny spiders on my arms. Am I going crazy? Are these drug bugs or what? And I went back to the screen. Then I saw the strings of thin webs glistening in the light, and tiny spiders floating past my vision. They were real indeed. I noticed a hole in the ceiling where they appeared to be falling from. I blasted a can of wasp spray into the hole, and hundreds of these little spiders began pouring out, streaming from their webs. Hundreds of them, all over me. I got home late and my phone was about to die. I always plugged my phone into the outlet under my bed. I collapsed on my bed and reached my hand under my bed to try and find my phone's charger. But what I found instead was some kind of squishy sack. I began poking and squeezing it, when all of a sudden, I felt hundreds of little legs poking me and crawling up my arm. I pulled my arm up from under my bed, and then screamed when I saw probably 30 baby spiders crawling up my arm. I shook them off, told my parents, and jumped in the shower right away. Turned out it was a baby spider sack, and there was an even bigger mother spider living under my bed.